Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this great webinar entitled Mastering Account Onboarding, Defeating Fraud, Reducing Friction, and Ensuring Compliance. I'm your host today, Stan Cowan with Effectiv. With me, as you can see on screen, is Leonardo Maya. He is the lead over here at Effectiv of Risk and Fraud Solutions. Joining him today is another expert in the field, Joshua Lin. He is the Senior Vice President of Product or Identity and Compliance at Socure, one of Effektiv's partners. Just a few housekeeping items before we get going. I wanted to remind everyone that today's session is being recorded. It should appear on our Effectiv website by tomorrow if you'd like to send it over to someone who needs to see it as well, or rewatch it yourself. You'll also be getting that with a follow-up email and a link to do so. Throughout the session today, please use the Q&A button you'll see on your screen to ask questions of our esteemed panelists. And we'll get to those as many as we can at the end. We might even choose some to answer during it. So please ask throughout the webinar itself. And so far, let's see, we've got quite a few attending right now, I see. Leo, I'm going to send it over to you to help introduce yourself and then send it over to Josh to also do the same. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. Leo?
Thank you, Stan. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be talking to you all. As Stan said, I'm the solutions lead here at Effectiv. I've been with our company for the past year and a half, helping our customers get set up with the most optimized and automated fraud and money laundering screening processes with the help of our platform. Prior to here, I've worked with fraud in previous opportunities, including handling KYC, onboarding, account takeover, and payments, including real-time, for several large banks, including one of Latin America's largest financial institutions. It's a pleasure to be talking to you all, and I hope this webinar helps you with understanding a bit more about optimizing your KYC processes.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Leo. Hey, team. My name is Josh Lin. I'm Senior Vice President of Product. I lead innovation for regulatory compliance here at Socure. I've been with the company for about 5.5 years. Prior to that, I managed the identity verification and authentication strategy at a top 10 bank. And yeah, been building out products ever since then. So thanks so much for having me.
Great. Thanks, Josh and Leo. Here's the agenda for today. Well, we've done number one, so let's move on to the discussion areas, what we're going to talk about. Josh and Leo are going to be going over understanding the landscape of where we are today. And then we're going to talk about harnessing that technology for KYC and IDV purposes. And lastly, in our discussion, we'll be talking about artificial intelligence and automation in the onboarding process. Again, please remember to submit your questions along the way.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks so much for this, Dan. Yeah, so I've been chatting with Leo over the last couple of weeks, and you know, one thing that was really refreshing that came out in our talks is this affinity towards a recognition that frictionless onboarding and rigorous KYC are not actually competing goals, but they're actually two sides of the same coin. I think specifically over the last year, we've seen our customer standards rising. We've also seen the standards of regulators continue to rise as well. And most notably, that's really became apparent through a lot of consent orders that I thought were really particularly interesting. One of my colleagues, Deb Geister, she's a former BSA officer and now runs compliance for us here at Socure as well. She put out a really great thought piece that highlighted that sponsor banks have been disproportionately affected by some of these enforcement actions. Even though they only make up about 2% of U.S. banks in financial institutions here in the U.S., they actually accounted for 13.5% of severe enforcement actions within the last year. And so we certainly see a lot of large settlements and fines, you know, that put these institutions at risk. MCC, or Metropolitan Commercial Bank, is one good example of that, where they had to pay $30 million just as a fine. But I think, you know, the importance of KYC, it goes beyond just avoidance of a fine itself, and it's really about responsible growth. How do we help our customers, the financial institutions, gig economy? How do we help them responsibly grow our users? And I think, you know, when we think about some of the fines and the implications that has, one of the things that becomes really, really prominent is actually the lasting effect that some of these things can have in place, like cease and desist orders, for example. They last on average for about 5 years or so, but they can extend all the way up to like 7 to 10 years. And the cost of that remediation is particularly challenging for institutions. That cost usually is about 12x in the first year or first 18 months or so. And so the question always becomes, in combination with the importance of effective KYC programs is, how do we 10x the efficiency without 10xing our cost? And for me, I think in a lot of our discussions with Leo, it really came down to three things. The first is, how do we focus more on accuracy for better risk mitigation? How do we focus on coverage for more responsible growth? And how do we focus on automation for streamlined efficiency? So I thought that was really, really telling that both of our companies have really aligned, towards solving those hard problems. But I don't know, what's your take, Leo?
Absolutely. I completely sign under everything that you said, Josh. And I think that's the biggest challenge there is we want to be compliant, but we don't want to add point solutions back to back to just add more friction and cost and end up gathering, at the end of the day, complex, sometimes even unnecessary data points to perform proper KYC. So it's that challenge of optimizing the calls that we're doing, the checks that we're doing, reducing that friction to the client while stopping the fraudsters and only the fraudsters. That's really the goal. And then while also keeping all of the checks compliant. Stan, I saw that you were able to get the polling function working.
Yes, can you see that on the screen?
We can, yeah.
Great. As you can see, guys, it's time for our first polling question. I've got it working now, so no fear. What is your top know your customer pain point? Please select one. We'll let it go for a few seconds here. I know Josh and Leo talked about a few of those. I can see a few more people need to reply. And then we'll stop the poll and show those responses so that everybody can see. Great. Can you see those on screen?
We can, yeah.
What do you guys think?
This is really interesting. I mean, when we think about the value proposition that Socure offers in the market, we answer very specific questions, right? And that is, how do I increase good user growth in a responsible way? How do I increase fraud capture? How do I decrease false positives? How do I lower the total cost of ownership? That sort of thing. But I think one of the key challenges the market continues to see in this space is fraud getting through. Fraud adapts so quickly. And there's a lot of providers that do the same thing in the space. Not a lot that really compete, if you know what I mean, with Socure, but they answer very specific questions and they do it in a variety of different ways. And that's why, platforms like Effectiv can really help orchestrate and bring those things together. And that's so important for us. So yeah, it's definitely a continued theme that we'll see in the industry as well. But Leo, what's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that as well as not only getting that data enriched from partners like Socure, that is the base of KYC is getting that data accurately enriched. But at the end of the day, fraud comes through with those ever-changing creative ways that fraudsters come up with. And we need to have a platform at the end of the day that enables you to change your thresholds and strategies in real time in a very easy, straight to the forward manner. A platform that also is able to look at the patterns and get the feedback that you're giving in regards to the onboardings and KYC that is happening already. And that platform needs to be able to feed into that feedback, optimize through AI, machine learning, gather those extra insights, and bring all of that into scores, into recommendations, into more automation. That way you are reducing that fraud while at the same time not increasing your other percentages of your other pain points as well. So it's really, we don't solve one problem by creating more. Rather, we have to solve them all at the same time.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Josh.
Parallelizing that makes a lot of sense to me. I think there are still some challenges that are faced in the industry. And that's why we see these themes continue to rise. One of those key themes that keeps coming up as well is, the data that we're using is very, very messy. And so we have to think internally about how we build products for that responsible growth and try to clean that up. There's so many examples of, companies that use Socure included, right? We used credit header, alternative credit, telecommunications, educational records, property tax records, even, government records from ECBSB, for example, in the IRS. But the data is so messy in the things that we see. Oftentimes there's multiple dates of birth reported, multiple SSNs. The address is reported as the most current, but it's got a historical date, associated to it. And the challenge is that there's not really a good single source of truth. Even for ECBSV, for example, there can be a lot of false negatives and a lot of false positives that can come out of that as well. And that's due to really the way that they do the matching within the system itself. They don't pass you back the actual name, social security number, date of birth of the individual. They just pass you back a yes or no. From some of the studies that we've done in testing the solution, we found that they are doing exact matching on the SSN, but there is some fuzziness that's allowed within the names that are being presented, and some fuzziness even within the dates of birth. And so how do we get to that stronger source of truth? For Socure, it's looking at a combination of machine learning capabilities as well as heuristics that are informed by our analysts as well. A good example of some of the heuristics that are informed by our analysts would be some of the business rules, right? You can look at when an SSN has been issued and then see if there is a single SSN on file, but multiple dates of birth, which date of birth more reasonably corresponds with one that we have on file, and sort of infer what the correct answer should be there, and then use feedback data from our customers to be able to help drive that decision as well. And then with that feedback data, you can actually cluster patterns and try to clean this up, at scale. But that'll, I think, always continue to be a challenge for us, because fraudsters are always finding ways to be able to create fabricated and manipulated identities within, what they deem to be, sources of truth.
Great.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Leo. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to add something really quickly as well. Some other examples that Josh and I even discussed in the last couple of weeks is sometimes you will see spousal information or parent information associated with your own PII, maybe that you're inputting. And that's, I think, why it's so important for us to hear a platform like Effectiv, an orchestration platform. We need to partner with data providers that really can offer you that quality data. That way we know that if that information that we're receiving is high quality, we do feel that confidence in making that decision of, I have confirmation that this is bad from the get-go, I have confirmation that this is good from the get-go. That way we reduce costs really at the end of the day and make sure that you're already cutting the low-hanging fruits. All the good fruits you're already cutting, the bad fruits you're already throwing away, and really just bringing out those extra steps of verifications only for customers that are needed, and really perform those step-up verifications in the most optimal way possible.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges, though, too, is that we see the cleanliness become a challenge within the data sources, even for good users, but especially in the most riskiest populations as well. And so really what that tells me is that fraudsters are exploiting the capabilities within these data aggregators to a higher degree, and trying to blend in with, normal and good identities. Some of the things that we've done to be able to sort of combat that is looking at those, the business logic. Out of that, we were able to reduce 30% of identity conflicts, and then the clustering took another 50% of some of those identity conflicts. Really what we see as a good record is a record that has a single SSN associated to it, a single date of birth, like single identifiers, and no conflicts in the historical recency of each of the different data elements, like an address, phone number, email, etc. And so looking at overlap between different sources helps us infer where that comes in, and that's why a lot of customers rely on us and Effectiv as well in our solutions.
Absolutely. I think what we can do with that data as well, I think this kind of leads us to our next topics and polling questions. So Stan.
Yes, I've got it right here. Now we're back on track. So how often do you update or evaluate new technology for your risk rules and models? As you can see the choices here, it's annually, quarterly, monthly, or all the time. You might be doing that right now. Please take a moment to select one of those answers, and we'll go through the results in just a moment.
I think for me, when I read this question too, there's not a right or wrong answer. Obviously, continually is going to be ideal, but there's always going to be competing priorities within organizations, and so there's a trade-off that has to happen, right? You want to make sure that you don't get into an analysis paralysis with something, that you do have good outcomes and quantitative outcomes that you can really measure and show to senior leadership as well. And so that's really helped us. But we do take a more continuous approach here at Socure as well, looking at both existing problems with old technologies as well as some new technologies that are sort of a function of LLMs, and some new innovations within AI. It's really great to be able to see a lot of people are doing the continuous analysis as well. Risk is very adaptive. But as part of that, I think the most important piece is the monitoring aspect of it, right? And making sure that you have good programs and good monitoring things in place to be able to look at model drift, for example. We look at PSI charts, population stability indices, to be able to see if a certain threshold breaks that requires manual review and another threshold that breaks that really requires some intervention and hop in. So I think it's always going to be a combination of continuous monitoring on the processes that we do have in place. And when we do have continuous monitoring in place, really making sure that you have well-defined quantitative outcomes to be able to help drive those decisions there as well.
Absolutely. And I'm just adding here as well, I think for those that do perform those technology evaluations annually or less frequent, I think that's where platforms that bring AI and machine learning to your processes can really come into play, because those platforms can really enable you to be able to think about it less in a way, where mostly you would rely on your continuous feedback of the data of you see that some SSN is a fraudulent SSN or a phone number is associated with a fraudulent individual that just applied. Systems like Effectiv and at the end of the day Socure as well, because feedback is exchanged between companies, is really important for us to continuously update our models at the end of the day and our intelligence to make sure that you don't necessarily need to review your processes too continuously, or we can really help you start giving you insights to be able to feel more comfortable in doing those continuous feedbacks as well. I think that goes a little bit into the technology that we can harvest for this. But Josh, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like monitoring, one of the things that we've done, not only putting these systems in place, but also doing third-party audits. We go through model governance reviews with third-party auditors, and that really helps provide a lot of the confidence that teams need to be able to start adopting these technologies as well. I think it's been really interesting to be able to see how new technologies have enabled faster growth for us, both from a product development perspective, but also solving our customers' problems. Some examples of that, right, is using LLMs to be able to stop fraud. We have a perplexity model that was developed internally by our team that looks at the sequencing of a username within a given email and tries to predict, is the next letter or in the sequence of the username itself, is it more likely to be A or is it more likely to be B? And if we start to see gibberish emails pop up, you can just bang on your keyboard. These models will help detect that. We've also used LLMs to be able to help provide explainability around our watch list solution. When we think about the end goal of what a watch list screening process should do, it should first be able to surface the risks of a given user. Is this name and this identity found within a watch list? But then it also has to answer that second question. And I think this is where a lot of vendors get hung up. It has to answer the question, is this actually probable to be the same individual or not? Not just based on name, but actually based on all the other identifiers. And so we've developed a lot of deep learning models that use a variety of different attributes about the individual, the cultural context, that's in place, both based on location, middle name, positioning, ethnicity of the given name, location of the person, etc., to be able to help arrive at a score that we determine to be actually the same individual or not, and then overlay LLMs on top of that to be able to provide some explainability. So that way analysts can really just either copy and paste or make a couple of quick edits as they're entering those reviews into the case management system that is, transparent and auditable for regulatory bodies as they come to be able to review it. And it's really working out well.
And I'll add here as well that thank you, Stan, for going to the next slide there, because I think this that Josh said ties in a lot of how intelligence and automation collaborate there, because having all of those great insights and all of those great machine learning and AI applications that partners like Socure have, we are really able to combine them all together in automation platforms. And I think that's where that automation and intelligence comes into play, is getting those signals and automating the identification of a bad customer, for example, through those automation platforms. This can really reduce the need for you to further review those applicants. And those platforms as well kind of enable you to link data points to each other. So for example, those emails that don't follow that pattern that Josh mentioned, for example, we can see that that was associated with a social security number that was then used for another application that everything checked out. But we should be able, it is very important for us to be able to identify that this SSN has been used before on a previously suspicious looking application. It's not necessarily just about that isolated individual moment that needs to be evaluated, but rather everything that's happening on all of the data points that are being used on a network of data that's been processed already. So I think that's a key point as well in bringing that quality to the KYC that you're performing.
Yeah, that's been a big differentiator for us too. A lot of people, when they think about an identity graph, and when we first built ours at Socure, we thought about building out a known network of good identities. And we do have that now, but what we found also that was really important in identifying fraud tactics is how fraudulent identities are actually connected to one another as well. There was an ATM fraud ring that had people, a person that was actually standing in front of an ATM, and they were just swiping new cards to be able to get them registered and check the balances, and then they would ship them out to other users all across the US. And so on paper, you would say like, hey, these are isolated incidents of fraudulent activity that's happening. But when you tie them back to users and the connection between those users' devices, that's where it gets really, really interesting. So you can actually attack these fraud patterns at scale rather than just isolated incidents. But it's that graphing techniques, I think, that have really helped us out.
Yeah, for sure. And I also would add here, and I think this kind of goes along as well with what I was going to talk next, is at the end of the day, we identify those bad data points that might be being used by fraudsters through leaked data, for example. That doesn't mean necessarily that that is completely fake data. Maybe the real owner of that data still needs to be able to open bank accounts and still needs to be able to go through KYC processes of their own and get approved. So it's not as easy as just declining everyone because they have those bad signals. That's where I think step-up verification, such as identity verification through liveness checks, document verification, really comes into play to prove, even though we do have suspicious signals about specific data points, if they're not enough for me to decline because they're all very suspicious in a very suspicious combination, I do want to confirm that that person is that person, because if they really are, through that selfie and through the validation of the driver's license or an ID card, we can really kind of offset a little bit of that risk by saying, okay, this person is an actual person. They are who they say they are. The data points make sense. So in that sense, that is an added friction, and at the end of the day, an added cost to those checks. But at the same time, we are reducing the number of good customers, good applicants that are declined because we're reducing fraud. Yeah. So that's kind of that balance that we need to figure out.
Yeah, it's like the nature of friction in and of itself isn't bad. It's just that we want to reduce the amount of friction for the good users, right? And step up the friction. And so really what you're highlighting here is the need for adaptive risk profiles, right? And so as you go through the verification process, as you do uncover some risky signals, you're able to step them up through additional verifications, right? Sometimes those additional verifications are going to be using device and behavioral signals. right? Mouse movements, mouse clicks, typing cadences, and things like that. Is this indicative of a good or a bad actor? And secondarily, is it indicative of this same user that I've seen before coming back? And if not, then takes, some additional steps. And that's where I think, Socure is really positioned uniquely in the market because we've created all of these building blocks for financial institutions to use. And then Effectiv has really built out the platform to orchestrate all of those different calls together. So it's just great to be able to see these technologies run in parallel to be able to solve for that manual review, which is that second piece that I saw on one of the polls that sort of scored the highest as existing problems for customers to be able to solve.
Exactly. And Stan, if you can go to the next slide, please. I think that's where we would really talk about where we can make that automation of manual reviews that Josh just talked about is in platforms like Effectiv, where we can really orchestrate those calls to providers the likes of Socure with different products within Socure as we need them as well. So we can use the insights, the scoring, the IDV, document verification, device fingerprinting. We don't need to call that for everyone. We need to call them in a step-up process as the checks that we're doing verify whether they're too risky, not risky at all. I'm not sure, so I want to do those extra checks. And really then giving all that information, preparing all that information that is extracted in a way that decisions can be automated through simple logic writing to create those automated strategy workflows, as well as enabling you to, after the reviews that you might still need to perform, give that feedback of, I know that this SSN is fraudulent, this application as a whole is fraudulent, and that can really then feed into that network analysis and connections that we talked about a little bit earlier.
Yeah, so important. And I think one of the key aspects of that is really kind of going back to the earlier point about cleansing data, really understanding where the differences within the data can highlight additional risk. Again, you're going to find a lot of records that have, and for good users also, that have multiple SSNs associated with them, multiple DOBs, address histories that just don't really make a whole lot of sense. And so how do we clean them up? Socure has a really novel approach in this, in the sense that when we test out vendors to be able to use within the data vendors to be able to use within the solution, we look at a combination of known goods, known bads, known fictitious, and known mismatched data, so we can really understand where each data source adds value, where it has noise, and where to be able to cut that out. You can't just trust everything. And so really having that forensic lens at the onset helps inform how we build products and ultimately the value that customers can get out of it, trying to reduce that noise. Yeah, so I thought that was a really key highlight, or a great highlight to be able to double click on.
Absolutely. Stan, do you want to go to the next polling questions?
Absolutely. Number 3, let's launch. As you can see, it says, what percentage of your applicants get flagged for additional KYC review? Less than 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, or over 15?
This question really strikes home for me too. When I was working at one of the top 5 banks, one of the key challenges that we had was just identifying certain demographics. There just wasn't enough information on them, new to country, for example, underage, or even just thin credit profile or credit invisible individuals. There wasn't enough information on them to be able to say whether they were indicative of fraud or not. And there wasn't another solution on the market that really focused on inclusivity. And one of the key differentiators that I found within Socure is that they really focused on building products for those more marginalized demographics. And by doing so, you actually create better products for everyone. And so I've really taken that to heart and included that in my product building mantra. But that had also helped us reduce some of those manual reviews. We went from 65 to 92% auto approval rates. About 30% of those used to be manual reviews, and now we're able to automate those. And you would think that normally by accepting more applicants, you might also be accepting more risk and having higher fraud rates, but our fraud rates went from 80 basis points down to 20 basis points. And so I was just floored and saw the value in the product. And of course, fraud has adapted since then, but so have our technology and so have our products as well. So it's great to be able to see that. I would definitely encourage some of these users to be able to take a look at the solutions that they're using, try to understand a little bit better if it's a function of coverage that's causing the that's causing the additional manual reviews, whether it's conflicts within the data itself, or whether it truly is risky individuals, and how to be able to automate that. But I think you'll be able to get a lot of that automation through streamlining your solution through Effectiv and Socure.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, be able to, I think, all that time spent today, and I see, because I see roughly 50% of the participants here review at least 10% of the KYC entrances. I think the time at the end of the day spent for those reviews, as they are automated, can then be turned into investigating more and running more analysis, offline analysis on the patterns that are happening, to increase that automation even more, to be able to be even more and more accurate with the declines, to stop even less good actors, potentially even start reducing that friction for good customers by finding different underlying patterns. Really, that time that's currently spent reviewing the applications in platforms that give that possibility of giving you that feedback is not spent on anything at the end of the day as well, because all that feedback returns back to the product, returns back to the strategy to then offer you an even better strategy as times go by.
Yeah, exactly.
Stan, do you want to go to the next slide? Thank you so much. Because I think this is where we would talk about, I think Josh and I already talked a lot about Effectiv and about Socure, but really they are some of the solutions that, when bundled together, really can then help you and any KYC analysis really be done in the most optimal way, with the reduced cost, optimized approval rates and decline rates, accuracy rates, and so on and so forth, with continuous feedback. As I said, as a strategy automation platform, it's key for platforms like Effectiv to be able to ingest initial data points requested by your business from your client during the onboarding process, be able to communicate with several data enrichment providers in that optimized way to extract the information needed only when needed, and easily use that information to make robust decisions automatically. A key piece of this is actually making sure that the automated decisions are easily explainable at the end of the day as well, because it all comes back to those auditing processes. If you can't explain the decision that you made, how can you prove that you are compliant at the end of the day? So I think that explainability piece also fits very heavily in this whole automation process. And I think a key part of this explainability lies in also enabling a robust case view, where all of the information extracted for each individual risk evaluation can be visualized in that clean and intelligent way by, for example, only displaying relevant information on the cases that were extracted. So we don't need to show everything, just show what matters, what went into that decision, so on and so forth. And this case view system also allows reviewers to confirm those automatic decisions made, modify those in case of bad identities, give that continuous feedback that we talked about. And one of the main fraud feedback data applications, for example, is scoring onboardings based on their closeness to confirmed risky PII data points used on previous applications. The way we can tell, this SSN might have looked all good, but we've seen it associated with that fake fraudulent email that was leveraged previously. So it might be worth doing an extra check on that second application, for example.
Yeah, I think when I think about this, it's really setting up a framework for trust, right? And it's trust through transparency. And really what that means to me is highlighting the things that are important, that are relevant for this, but doing it in a more transparent way. And so, a lot of the solutions on the market for CIP checks, for example, they'll just tell you it's a yes/no match. We built out Verify Plus to be able to tell you, not only is it a yes/no match on each of the different elements, but we also tell you the data that we have underlying that particular identity. So, hey, instead of, Josh is an applicant, we actually have John on file, or it's not just John, junior, we actually have John senior, etc. We'll show the actual SSN that we have on file that we believe to be the most correct for that individual. We'll show you all the address history, the phone history, as well as the recency around those as well. And I think that has really, invigorated a new sense of, transparency for our financial institutions as they're going through audits with their regulators, because they can now show exactly why they made a decision in a particular way, in a way that they hadn't been able to before. So I love that theme of underlying transparency there.
Perfect. And Stan, can you go to the next slide, please? Because I think I would love to give some examples as well on how platforms like Effectiv can be leveraged for, at the end of the day, getting those insights, translating them into those explainable insights, displaying them the best way possible, as well as just optimizing your costs and what is called at the end of the day. Our typical flow here at Effectiv, what we usually do is we receive the data, the user input data in an automated manner. So there's reduced friction at the end of the day as well for your reviewers or any internal person to have to enter data on a different system. Information comes directly from the client to platforms like Effectiv, where we are really able to use that input to extract that information from data enrichment partners only when necessary through those step-by-step verifications. We apply those intelligent rules and machine learning models on top of that enriched data to reach that automated decision. This automated decision is returned in real time for your client as well, meaning that it's that real time and in the moment feedback of you look good, we're approved, or we're declining you. We can enable as well different adverse action notices if needed. The reason why an account was declined, so it's not just you got declined, we really can tell you why. And for some regulations, you do need to tell the client why and give those adverse action notices. So all that is enabled through platforms like Effectiv as well. And as I think I said probably too many times, that use of continuous feedback to help AI and machine learning get that get even better and quickly adapt as well to new patterns as well. I would also add that, as I said before, KYC analysis is not just that individual isolated event. It's all of the onboardings and all the connections that are happening, but more so than onboarding, it is actually what is happening after that good client onboards with you. Is how are they accessing your platform? How are they transacting? How are they changing their password too often? Are they accessing your account, their accounts from a different device? Are they changing their transaction behavioral? Those things, even though they might not necessarily be correlated to that initial onboarding process, they're all a big part in knowing your customer at the end of the day, which is what KYC is. So you know who they are and you know how they behave. And if they start behaving in an unexpected way, whether that is because of account takeover, meaning third-party fraud as well, or someone used actual data and data that made sense and managed to trick the verifications from Socure and Effectiv, we can see maybe different patterns there. Fraudsters sometimes will be too aggressive in the beginning or too conservative in the beginning, and then all of a sudden be too aggressive with their transactions. For example, we can really use that to identify good, not good behavior, and use that feedback back to those data points to then, if that account is closed or someone else tries to open a new account through a device that performed risky events, for example, you can know, okay, this device, even though all the data looks good, the device itself might be a little suspicious. That IP address, that address itself. So it's a lot more at the end of the day, and a lot more through these connected platforms like Effectiv that can handle multiple use cases. It's that really life cycle of the client that I think enables an even more robust knowledge of who your customer actually is and their behaviors.
Yeah, it's a great thing to be able to highlight too. I think that a lot of the intelligence that we get really stems from the patterns that we see, and the patterns come from the aggregation of observations. right? So it's one thing for me to be able to say, hey, this is coming in from a single exit node, proxy tool or something like that. But it's another to be able to say, hey, the frequency of occurrence that I normally see identities coming in from college addresses or from particular regions like within the US, for example, this is normal or abnormal, and it's being able to actually provide those insights back to our customers that, hey, this. I think it was Peter Drucker, or maybe it was Peter Thiel. That's who it was that said statistics don't work when your sample size is 1, and so you've really got to be able to see the intelligence at scale, and the only way to be able to do that is through the aggregations, and so that's why I think that our partnership really highlights a lot of that, because we're able to see those observations from day 0 account opening all the way through post authentication events as well, contact detail changes, money movement, check image views, all of that sort of thing. We're able to track that user throughout the entire life cycle to be able to populate those observations as well. So it's just been great.
I think for adding that, Josh, I think at the end of the day, like all of these topics that we covered here today, I think, of course, it's a lot, but at the end of the day, it's good practices that will really, at the end of the day, ensure that you are reducing your fraud while making sure that you're not adding friction to good customers that don't need friction, or adding friction to only whenever that's needed. Good applicants will go through anyway, and that continuous feedback will make sure that the accuracy of the decisions that are taken on your KYC at the end of the day get better and better over time. And get to that, I think ideal and almost sounds like a fake state of you're only declining what is actually fraud. But with that continuous feedback and intelligence from platforms like Effectiv and from partners like Socure, we're closer than we've ever been. So
yeah, couldn't agree. All right, well, maybe we can turn it over to the audience as well. I know that there's a lot to be able to hear. Want to answer some specific questions?
Yeah.
Let me help, and what's top of mind?
Yeah, we do have quite a few here. Let's get to them. Number one, specifically, what other information can be leveraged to identify risks in identity after an account has been opened?
Yeah, great question. I think this all stems back to what our view of an identity is, right? Our goal is to be able to provide a 360-degree view of an individual as they interact online. That happens at day 0, and it also happens, post authentication as well. And so we have to think about how identities are formed, right? We've got, a good sense of who a government, what a government sees a person as. You've got unique identifiers like a social security number or an ITIN. You've got some core identity elements of who they are as a person, and that's based on the household that they grew up in, people that they're associated with, their name, their date of birth, their phone, etc. You've also got a social semblance of who who a person is, based on who they interact with, how they express themselves at work, where they actually work, things like that. And all of these elements really make up a collective identity, if you will. And when we see a collective identity online, it's represented in a number of different ways, but you have to look at each of the different data points or each of the different axes of that identity. So you've got core identity elements: name, social security number, date of birth, address, email, phone, IP, but you've also got behavioral and device signals as well to be able to help inform that. And then depending on the level of friction that you're comfortable with and that your users will be able to accept, in some cases, you also have biometrics in documents that can get appended to those identities as well. But it's really taking that 360 degree view of an individual as they interact online to be able to help inform that.
nothing to add there, Josh. Your answer was perfect.
Great. Here's another question. As companies move more digitally and rely on email and text more, how can Socure and Effectiv help to verify that the email and phone number provided is associated with the user and not fraudulent?
Yeah,
I was going to say that's a great question. I think we can obviously rely, and I think, on some already more basic checks, such as, two-factor authentications, such as sending tokens to that person's cell phone or to the person's email to confirm that they have ownership of that account. I think it's also interesting that there's sometimes two concepts of ownership, whereas the concept of I am the owner of that email or that phone, or I have access to that phone or that email. Those are two different concepts that, depending on the application, have to be applied differently. There might be an application on the person being able to access and see the text message that was sent to that phone is enough, but sometimes we need to be able to connect that phone with that person. And I think that's where partners like Socure come in play, because we can get those signals of this person is associated with this email, this individual is associated with this phone number, and so many other super useful signals.
For me, I think it comes down to like proof of life signals, right? Yes, we can determine whether I've seen this email address in the past and whether I've seen it associated to this name, but have I also seen it associated to social media accounts? And do those social media accounts have active postings? Does this actually represent like a good user? For a physical address, right? Is it residential in nature or is it commercial? If it is commercial, is it a mail forwarding, or does it relate to someone's job or somewhere where they visit? And so you try to triangulate that to location information of where you've seen their device in the past. And it's that triangulation and that pattern, I think, where a lot of the the insights come from. But it all comes down to proof of life signals. Is this an active and actual user that we can see, physically in the real world, but just through digital proxies?
Thanks, guys, for
All
answering that.
boils down to that behavior.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Leo. Okay, next question. How does previous knowledge of bad actors impact the decision-making process during the KYC process?
That was a mouthful. Say that one more time, Stan. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. How does previous knowledge of bad actors impact the decision-making process during KYC?
Great. Yeah, great question. So I think this is where we want to start to differentiate between a bad actor with good user data versus an actual bad user. And when I think of a bad user in the context of identity here, I think of a fabricated or a manipulated identity, right? But I think it's one thing to try to separate and say, hey, do I have a reasonable belief that this person actually exists in the real world? I'm really looking for those proof of life signals. Identities that are formed, do we have speeding tickets associated to them, for example? Do I have court records? Do I have evidence of a birth certificate or an SSN actually being issued to this individual? So that's one thing. But then second is, now that I know that this user exists, are they actually who they say they are? And that's where we have to get into a lot of the feature engineering to be able to determine, based on the inputs that I have, how can I extract out additional features, and what are those additional features really telling me, about that particular individual?
Yeah, just adding to that, I think as well, what we've touched upon before is that those connections and relationships of what we know that has happened as well. I think that part of seeing that this email has been used on an application that used a fake SSN that Socure identified as fake, and we were able to decline, and being able to see those connections really can make you not necessarily invalidate that phone number specifically, but say, oh, this application has data points that are connected to that other one, so that increases your risk a little bit more. And if you see potentially risks associated with other data points from that application, it might be something worth acting on.
And I think it goes both ways too, right? Like coming back to the feedback data, you can use feedback data to be able to say, I've seen the same applicant, or I've seen the same attribute that the applicant posed to me in previous fraudulent events. And that helps me inform that there is additional risk. But I can also use feedback data to be able to say, hey, I've seen this same identity who's been verified in the past with the same device before, and I do have other proof of life signals. The fact that they're presenting me a new address or a new phone or something else doesn't actually mean that it's risky if I have everything else saying that it's the same user. And sometimes those marks are very hard to distinguish between, especially looking at the human eye, right? And so that's why we use the machine learning models to be able to really infer what the proper weightings for those features should be.
Great. Looks like we have a specific question for you, Josh, on the secure side. Is there a specific module Secure has to help verify if the email address or phone number are associated with the user?
Yes, we have a couple of them actually. So the first one is our fraud module that looks at the holistic identity, and so email is going to be a part of that. But then if you're specifically looking at a transaction that looks at just email, maybe you're going to add a payee for something, and the way to be able to do that is through an email. You only have a name and an email. You would use our email risk module to be able to do that. And the email risk module will help you determine, based on the information that's provided, is this more likely to be indicative of third-party fraud or not? And then two, is this person actually associated to that email address? But that could be a combination of either our email risk module or a fraud module, depending on the level of attributes and depending on the flow they use. But happy to chat through that if there's any other questions.
I do see other questions. Let's see. The next one is, how can account funding validations benefit the onboarding process?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple of different ways. If you're looking to boost user engagement and get them onboarded, much faster, really what we've seen some of the customers do in the gaming space is they will actually just prompt the user upfront to be able to fund an account. By asking for their routing number, account number, and name, they're able to pull back some of the information from the account and then pre-fill the rest of the application for the user. And that really gets them through, from a growth perspective or customer acquisition perspective, it helps them get through that application much faster. That also means, though, that if you're pre-filling some of the information, you're going to be a little bit more heavily reliant on some of the more passive signals like device and behavioral information. In other flows, like traditional financial institutions, you would normally verify the identity first, and then you go through the account funding. And so the account funding piece of it will look at the given name, routing number, and account number. And we first say, hey, does this account actually exist in the real world at an institution? Great if it does. But then two, does it actually belong to this person, to make sure that it's not being funded from someone else? I think one of the key challenges in this space, though, is that the passive data that's available is very sparse. And so you'll often see some providers have coverage in the 10 to 20% range. Some data providers have coverage in like the 60 to 70% range. And so oftentimes what you see is users will have a waterfall effect where they'll go to one vendor first, and then they'll flow down. So here on this particular product, because we have these challenges with data sparsity, we actually built a per hit pricing model. So you're only charged on the transactions that we actually have good intelligence for. You're not charged on a transaction where we don't have a high degree of confidence that the account exists and that it actually belongs to the individual. But I think this is also where Effectiv can come in and add a lot of value, because our coverage rates are going to be anywhere from 70 to 80% coverage, right? And that's going to have a unique value proposition against another provider that may serve some of the top 5 banks. We really went after coverage specifically for the fintech and credit building type of opportunities. And so by layering in the different providers, you're going to need an orchestration layer to be able to help optimize that flow, and that's where Effectiv can really come in to be able to provide value there too.
Exactly. Make sure that we're calling extra data providers to validate that wherever needed. In the application that is needed as well. So in those different flows for gaming and banking, they might be used in different parts of that strategy. One might be in the very beginning of the flow, another one might be at the very end of the flow. So orchestration platforms like Effectiv can really, they have to be flexible enough to enable all of those different applications of those data points for fraud identification at the end of the day.
Great. All right. Next question. We have a few more minutes. Maybe we can squeeze 2 more in here.
Sure, absolutely.
How can a company with multiple products optimize the account opening process?
Leo,
this sounds right up your alley.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another value proposition of platform orchestrations, orchestration platforms like Effectiv, is you can really connect all of your different products into Effectiv all at once, into platforms like Effectiv all at once, and be able to leverage pre-existing checks on individuals that you already know, already leverage the decision that was made there. That way, maybe your individual opened a checkings account and then they want to open a savings account. You don't need to perform full KYC for that savings account necessarily. If it's rather recent on, like in that account, the savings account creation, for example, was requested on the same device as the checkings account, you might be able to skip KYC altogether because you have already enough indications that that is the same person on the same device, same location. So that can streamline really even the data that the client needs to input to open those different products, kind of thing, and really enable you to only ask for extra information to fill in maybe some specific gaps about the different products that you're onboarding. So that orchestration and connection between those different use cases and products at the end of the day are really key there too. Make sure that you're not spending more money than you should. You're not reviewing something that you already know that is good and that you already approved just last week, for example. So it really becomes more of an orchestration problem than anything else.
Great. Thank you, Leo, for that. Anything to add there, Josh?
I think you framed it up quite well.
Okay. Here's another one. Do y'all see a high number of false positives related to email and phone number verification? And part 2 of this question is, in what steps are you taking to decrease that false positives related to email and phone number verification?
Yeah, great question. So the way that we've built models first is by looking at each of the different data elements that are provided. We build models specific to each of those different problems. So we have an address risk model, we have a phone risk model, we have an email risk model, and that creates hyper accuracy within the problems that those models try to solve. I'm trying to pull it up right now, but we've got just north of 90% AUC on. So that's one of the measurements that we look at from a performance measurement. It's basically your true positive plotted against your false positives. So we have north of 90% AUC on those. And then within the riskiest 5%, it looks like we've got over 40% fraud capture within those as well. And so I'm happy to dive in deeper. Each account is going to be a little bit different based on the population or based on the problem that you're trying to solve for. But I think you'd be quite pleased in comparison with other products that are on the market.
Thanks for that addition, Josh. We were just about out of time, so I'm going to go to the last one here.
I think there was one question, right? Do you have clients in Canada?
Oh, yeah. Yes, please go ahead.
Socure actually just recently expanded in a wide variety of different markets, but we've really focused our coverage and our models in Canada, EU, UK, and Mexico. The way that we got there first is a lot of our clients said, hey, we see the success that Socure has with us in the US. We'd love to be able to take you guys international. Is there anything that you can do for us? And we said, great, let's figure it out. And so we've spent the last year building out the products and then just launched with a few major brokers, a couple of cryptocurrencies, crypto exchanges, and then some fintechs as well in that space. But yes, we do have, specifically for Canada, we do have coverage there. We do quite well. So yeah, happy to chat through internationalization.
Yeah, and just adding something real quick here as well. That's I think the beauty of platform orchestration platforms as well is we can leverage Socure. We can leverage other data providers as well if needed, if it's covering countries that Socure doesn't cover, for example. And we can really bring all of those different countries and different providers into the same strategy, into the same workflow, to be able to treat everyone the same and really have all of the checks that happen if you're dealing with multiple different countries, for example, have them all sit in the same place with the same level of checks and explainability.
Great. Thank you, guys. We're just at time exactly. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts, Josh and Leo?
It's just been a real pleasure being able to connect both with you, Leo, as well as the rest of the audience. So thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to be able to represent some of the great work that my team has done here.
Absolutely. And on my side, pleasure as always to chat with you as well, Josh, and to everyone here. Hopefully, this was a very useful and full of knowledge hour. Feel free to reach out to us as well for any questions that you might have on how you can leverage platforms like Effectiv and Socure to optimize your KYC processes.
Agreed. Such a great discussion. Both of you, Josh, Leo, thank you for your time. Thank you to the audience for joining us today. Again, look for that recording on our website tomorrow. Thanks again, guys. Have a great rest of your day and week. Bye-bye.
Likewise. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, everyone.